Greetings, my dear viewer. You're on the channel The Price of Cheating. The channel is for those who appreciate traditional family values and condemn adultery. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. I never thought I would find myself recounting this story, but life has a way of throwing curveballs when you're least prepared. My name is John, though around here everyone calls me Big John. I've spent my entire career in construction, shaping homes with my hands, and years of lifting and building have made me as unyielding as the beams I raise each day. People often say I'm built like a fortress, but no one ever told me how fragile things can become in an instant. Julie, my wife, my partner, my everything, was the cornerstone of my world. We met over 20 years ago during high school. Back then, I was the quiet guy on the sidelines, watching her laugh with her friends in the center of every crowd. Her boyfriend at the time was a guy named Stan, but most called him Meat. You can probably guess why. In those days, I wouldn't have wagered a penny on my chances with her. But life, as it often does, had other plans. After college, Julie came back to town, and fate handed me an opportunity I never saw coming. I'll never forget the day I bumped into her at Tony's pharmacy. Her smile lit up the room, making the mundane feel magical. 9 months later, we tied the knot. I thought I had everything I could ever want. Our home was a haven, a beautiful property sprawled across 10 acres of lush, wooded serenity. It was a quiet, private place, filled with the joyful chaos of our 2 kids and the companionship of a couple of loyal dogs. I worked tirelessly to ensure Julie and the kids had everything they needed, building a life I believed she cherished. Looking back, maybe that was my first mistake, assuming rather than knowing. Over the years, I ignored the small, creeping signs that something was amiss. At first, I brushed it off as the natural rhythm of marriage, ups and downs like the changing tides. But a part of me sensed something deeper, a growing distance in Julie's demeanor. Her warmth was replaced with a frosty detachment. Every attempt I made to reconnect seemed to push her further away. Still, I convinced myself it was temporary. That was until one night in the year 2011, the night everything collapsed. It began like any other Friday. The guys from work were heading to Nick's bar for some pool and beers, our usual tradition. But something about that night felt off. A nagging instinct told me to skip the outing and head home early. I couldn't pinpoint why, but the feeling gnawed at me. So, instead of joining my crew, I took the back road by the barn, as I often did, to check on the animals before heading home. The cool autumn air greeted me as I parked the truck. The house was still, the windows open to let in the crisp evening breeze. As I approached the porch, I heard voices. One was a man's voice, unfamiliar yet somehow recognizable. "You sure he's not coming back anytime soon?" the voice asked. Julie's response was casual but carried a tone I hadn't heard in years. "Relax. John's at Nick's. He won't be home until midnight. Until then, this place is ours." Her words hit me like a freight train. I froze, disbelief coursing through me. Summoning my courage, I stepped closer to the screen door. There he was, Stan, the same Stan from high school, sprawled on my couch with Julie nestled against him as if nothing else mattered. A tidal wave of anger surged through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. Bursting in wouldn't solve anything. I needed proof. Silently, I pulled out my phone and began snapping pictures. Each click captured the betrayal. Stan's smug expression, Julie's doting gaze, her hand resting on his chest as if I were a ghost in my own home. Her laughter cut through the quiet night like a blade. "God, you make me feel alive," she said. "John never touches me like this." Stan chuckled, leaning closer. "Didn't you tell me one man could never be enough for you?" My fists clenched as fury boiled within me. This wasn't just infidelity, it was an insult to everything I had built. "What about John?" Stan asked, smirking. "Think he's man enough for you?" Julie's response was a dagger to my heart. "He tries," she said, "but next to you, he's nothing. It's like settling for a rusty pickup when there's a brand new sports car in the driveway." I had heard enough. Quietly, I slipped around to the back door and entered the den. They were so engrossed in each other that they didn't notice me until I grabbed Stan by the ponytail and yanked his head back. "What's the matter, meat?" I growled, my voice colder than ice. "Not so fun with the husband watching, is it?" Stan yelped, but I gave him no time to react. My hand shot to his throat, slamming him against the wall. Julie screamed, fumbling for a blanket to cover herself. "John, stop! It's not what it looks like." My glare pinned her in place. "Don't insult me, Julie. It's exactly what it looks like." Stan struggled, his face turning crimson. "You think you're a big man?" I snarled. "Coming into my house, sleeping with my wife, and thinking you'd get away with it?" I tightened my grip until he wheezed for air. "You're going to regret this, meat." Julie's sobs filled the room as she begged me to stop. But my patience had long since evaporated. I let Stan crumple to the floor, a heap of useless arrogance. In that moment, I knew my life had irrevocably changed. The dream I had spent decades building was shattered, and there was no turning back. I turned my attention sharply to Julie, gripping her arm with an intensity that made her flinch. "Did you honestly believe I would just overlook this? You've destroyed everything we built. For what? A faded fling who doesn't even see you as more than a passing thrill?" Her lips quivered, but I felt no sympathy. I wasn't close to finished. "You told him I wasn't enough for you. Let's see if your so-called hero can handle what comes next." My words were icy, each syllable edged with pure fury as I dragged Stan by his hair toward the door. He fought weakly, letting out pitiful noises, but there was no chance I'd let him off that easily. With a single, powerful motion, I hurled him onto the porch. He collapsed in a heap, as lifeless as discarded trash. Julie stood paralyzed, her face pale and stricken, fully grasping the irreversibility of what had happened. "John, stop," she murmured. "I didn't want this. It was a mistake." A bitter, hollow laugh escaped me. "A mistake? No, Julie. This wasn't an accident. You made a choice. Now you'll live with the consequences." I stormed out of the house without a backward glance, leaving her to the wreckage she had created. This was far from over. Revenge is a dish best served cold, and I had plenty of time to plan her reckoning. Stan wouldn't be the only one to feel the sting of betrayal. Julie was about to learn the price of her actions, and I was just getting started. Each step I took away from that house was fueled by a turbulent storm of emotions. My mind churned, rage clouding any semblance of clarity. But one thing stood out. This wasn't the conclusion, only the beginning. What I had done so far was a mere prelude. Julie and Stan had no idea what lay ahead. They might believe I would simply walk away, but they were gravely mistaken. The pain I planned to deliver would cut deeper than any physical blow. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of quiet, calculated determination. I threw myself into work, my hands worn and calloused from years of hard labor. Every ache in my body felt different this time, fueled by a single purpose. I wasn't building a structure. I was constructing a plan, each piece meticulously placed to dismantle their lives. The foundation of my strategy was simple. Strike Stan where it hurt most, his pride. Stan was a man who thrived on appearances, his entire identity built on being the invincible, admired guy everyone looked up to. But reputations are fragile things, easily shattered with the right amount of pressure. I knew his old football buddies still congregated at the same bars, reliving their glory days. They didn't yet know what had transpired, but that was about to change. I made a few pointed calls, planting seeds of the truth with the right people. Old friends, co-workers, anyone who loved a juicy story. I gave them just enough to stoke their curiosity. Gossip spreads like wildfire in a small town, and by week's end, Stan's once unassailable reputation was already in tatters. The fallout was swift. Over drinks at Nick's bar, I overheard how Stan's old crew had booted him from a game night, mocking him relentlessly. His humiliation became the town's favorite spectacle. It felt good, but it was only the opening salvo. Julie was next. She needed to feel the crushing weight of shame and regret that had been suffocating me since the moment she betrayed me. Her carefully cultivated image, her job at the bank, her spotless reputation, her standing in the community, would unravel piece by piece. She had no idea how far I was willing to go to make her pay. Julie had always been meticulous about her appearance. She thrived on being seen as the reliable, respectable woman of the town. But trust is a delicate thing, and once it cracks, it's nearly impossible to repair. A few strategically placed murmurs about her infidelity, nothing explicit, just enough to spark questions, were all it took to get the ball rolling. I didn't want her world to collapse instantly. I wanted her to feel every crack, every fracture growing wider until the weight became unbearable. It started small. Polite greetings turned chilly, colleagues began avoiding her gaze, and the whispers behind her back grew louder. The once warm atmosphere around her became cold and hostile. She felt it. I saw it in the way her shoulders sagged, in the defeated way she carried herself. Meanwhile, Stan had become a shadow of his former self. One night I spotted him slumped over a drink at the bar, his usual swagger replaced with bitter resignation. His friends still spoke to him, but the respect they once held for him was gone, replaced with mocking disdain. The golden boy athlete was now just another man caught in a scandal no one would forget. Watching their slow descent into misery was gratifying, but I knew my work wasn't done. This was only the start of what I had in store. They weren't completely broken, not yet. The final phase of my plan remained, the one that would guarantee they bore the full weight of their treachery. I knew Julie too well not to predict when she'd be at her most vulnerable. She wasn't oblivious. She understood that I hadn't finished. Regret and guilt were devouring her from the inside. One morning I caught sight of her trudging from her car to her job at the bank, her head hanging low, shoulders drooping under an invisible burden. Rumors about her drinking had reached me, and her disheveled state on certain mornings confirmed them. Rest seemed like a distant memory for her. She was unraveling, bit by bit. Still, she clung to a futile hope that things could somehow be set right. She imagined she could undo the damage, that someday I might find it in me to forgive her. What she didn't realize was that forgiveness had never been part of my equation, not for her. That same morning I made sure she noticed me as I passed her house. I didn't say a word, but the panic in her eyes when they met mine told me everything I needed to know. Fear consumed her, and that fear was the final tool I required. Later that week, I arrived at her house in the evening. She stood on the porch, nervously fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. It had been weeks since the night I caught her with Stan, and though the town's whispers were beginning to fade, Julie hadn't moved on. She was still clutching at the delusion that something between us could be salvaged. When she spotted me approaching, her face drained of color. She froze in place, her breath catching in a barely audible gasp. "John," she said softly, her voice unsteady. "Why are you here?" I stepped closer, my gaze locking onto hers. "I wanted to see if you've learned anything," I replied, my tone as frigid as winter frost. Her eyes dropped to the ground, unable to meet mine. I'm sorry, John, please," she stammered, but I silenced her with a quick, dismissive gesture. "You've lost the right to apologize, not after what you've done." My words sliced through the air, and I watched her lips tremble as she instinctively stepped back, the fear emanating from her almost tangible. "It was a mistake," she pleaded, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I thought things with Stan were different." I shook my head slowly, disdain etched on my face. "Your intentions don't matter, Julie. You made your choice, and now you'll live with the fallout." Her tears spilled over, and she broke down completely. "Please, John, please. I don't know what I was thinking. I never wanted this." "Of course you didn't," I said, my voice heavy with sarcasm. "But that doesn't change the fact that it happened. And now, you'll face the consequences just as I have to. You destroyed everything I built, everything I gave you." I grabbed her arm firmly, pulling her closer. "Stan isn't the only one who's lost everything. You lost me, Julie. The moment you let him near you, you lost it all." She sobbed uncontrollably, her entire body shaking under the weight of her remorse. But I felt nothing, no sympathy, no mercy. Those emotions had vanished long ago. "This is your penance," I whispered harshly, "and it's only just begun." I turned and walked away, leaving her collapsed and shattered on the porch. Months later I heard she had left town. Word had it that she moved to another state to escape the ruins of her choices. As for Stan, he'd relocated to a different town as well, his reputation irreparably tarnished. No one here wanted anything to do with him. They both got what they deserved. As for me, I wasn't certain if I'd ever feel whole again. But one thing was clear. Sometimes, the most satisfying revenge is reclaiming the power that was stolen from you. This concludes the story. If you like it, then put your powerful like and subscribe to the channel.